The topic, artificial, collective, and emotional intelligence. We're talking a lot about intelligence these days. Maybe we're lacking it. How might we combine them better? And of course, our mission at Smarter Together, as Elise has mentioned, is to disseminate some of the principles of collective intelligence for stronger democracy. And I'm delighted to see that some of the co-authors in the Handbook of Collective Intelligence for Democracy and Governance are with us today, including Chiara Rosselli, Gita Krah, and others. I might not be seeing everyone here. And I'm also part of Dreamocracy, which is the consultative side of this, helping public authorities, NGOs, etc., try and be more creative. So we're very proud to have published this nearly a year ago, June 20, and as Elise said, it's an open resource, open access resource. We won't need to belabor the topic. These are dangerous times for democracy. I read recently that this is the year when there are the most number of people voting this year, more than any other year between 2004 and 2000. And as per this quote, AI is increasingly seen as a threat to democracy, but how could we consider this as an opportunity? This is the perhaps provocative question that will be the topic for today's conversation. And of course, we know very well that there are lots of threats. So in order to tackle this topic today, well, Elise and I have introduced ourselves. We have Dr. Stéphane Verhulst, who's co-founder and director at GovLab's data program. And we have David Mass, who's head of data and citizen insight at make.org. Now, when I was preparing for this yesterday morning, I did the screen capture of the first 20 titles on Google News with the words artificial intelligence. And this is, of course, just a snapshot, literally, of what's being said. And out of 10 articles here, you have a whole load of articles about how there are huge investment deals going on around artificial intelligence. There's two worrying titles, maybe you'll have spotted them. One about racial bias in artificial intelligence, and another one about AI could make the 4-day week inevitable. Sound both somewhat ominous. And there's one article about the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. So imagining this sample to be representative of the noise and the conversation around artificial intelligence and democracy, you would have about 70% of people saying, well, some people are going to make shitloads of money with AI. 20% it's going to wreck our democracy, and 10% we're doing something about it. And my hunch is that this is probably not the exact figure. It's probably, the share of news and commentary around artificial intelligence is probably greater around the worries and the concerns about the impact of AI in democracy. And the number of you registering and joining today is probably showing this also. And again, we won't go into the number of risks one might be seeing for democracy. If you can see the shared slide, I listed some that were obvious to me that reflects the conversation that's going on in the media and elsewhere. And I'm sure we could add to this. And if you want, you can certainly add to this in the chat. So the concerns are there. We know about, and it feels to me like we found this lamp and we rubbed it and a genie came out of it, and it's kind of scary. And we're sort of struggling to gain control of it and to master it. And my feeling is we won't have any choice now but to manage this genie now that it's out of the bottle. So the proposal today for today's conversation is not necessarily to dwell so much on the threats, but to consider whether democracy has a card to play by tapping better into the potential that AI has to make democracy and governance smarter, in conjunction with a better understanding and mastery of collective intelligence and emotional intelligence skills. What if we brought these different types of abilities and tools and skills together? So in order to address this, we'll be starting the conversation with Stéphane and David and Elise. But first, to do things in the right order, is there anything in terms of the definitions, Stéphane, that we should bear in mind, keep in mind in terms of the definitions of intelligence AI, CI, or EI?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Stephen, and a pleasure to be part of this. And again, I'm very daunted with the audience here, because I think some of you actually have a lot more to say than I will perhaps during this conversation. And I like, Stephen, that you set this up as a conversation, because I think this is still very early days. And I think we can learn from those conversations by both tapping into experience among all of you as it relates to collective intelligence, but also, of course, what's the kind of frontier of AI as it relates to collective intelligence. And as I think one of the reasons perhaps invited me is that a few years ago, I wrote a piece where I tried to make the case is that actually both CI, collective intelligence, and AI have a lot to contribute to each other, and that from my point of view, innovation in the governance and democracy space is actually going to happen where both meet, because we actually do need to augment collective intelligence in multiple ways, and we can go into detail why that is the case and what are some of the challenges with collective intelligence and how AI can help. But the other way around as well, as we all know, some of the challenges that you raised there, Stephen, at the beginning of this conversation, as it relates to biased output, but also as it relates to some of the power asymmetries that AI is creating, can actually be solved by applying collective intelligence methods as well. And so super excited to be part of this conversation. But to answer your question, because I saw Steve, you were already getting worried that I would not just even go to the question. Obviously, it's a complicated term, right? Intelligence, and even anyway, if I mention it to some of my friends here who are working on surveillance and on security, intelligence has a whole different meaning in terms of kind of surveillance and secrecy and spying, as opposed to the intelligence that we are talking about here today. And from my point of view, I think there are kind of three common elements, both across collective, artificial, and emotional intelligence. And the first one is about that intelligence at least refers to an act of processing, which is where you either process large amounts of data or you process input and expertise that is widely distributed in society, or you process emotional cues. And I think that's at least one area that we can, I guess, perhaps agree upon, is that intelligence refers to processing quite often of information, but the type of information is quite often different, whether it's numbers and code, or whether it's expertise, lived experience, or whether it's emotional kind of cues as well. So that's the first, I would say, area of intelligence. The second is then how you actually use that input and process of input as it relates to output. And so the idea is that ultimately collective or good intelligence, if we can call that, also means sound decision making, right? Is that to a large extent, intelligence is super important for then making decisions, whether that's at the level of decision making in solving public problems, or whether it's even at the personal level as well. But there's a strong correlation between intelligence and behavior and decision making as well. And then the third one, which I think is super important, is then it also notion of adaptive learning, right? Is that intelligence is never static, but that you ultimately have a certain level of adaptive learning. If things change, then then the intelligence changes as well, which also means that it requires a certain kind of mindset quite often, including an open mindset, in order to really leverage, for instance, a collective and emotional makes decisions as well. And so from my point of view, if I start thinking about how do we start capturing this concept of intelligence, I think it's really about how do we process input, and that input might be different. How do we go about then translating that input into actually decisions? And how do we do this in an adaptive way? And I think collective intelligence, if you look at it, does this in a particular way. Artificial intelligence does this in a particular way. And emotional intelligence does this also in a particular way, quite often at kind of the individual level. And the real potential here is to how can those three complement each other, because all three have strengths and weaknesses in how we process input, how we translate that into decision making, and how do we do this in an adaptive way, if at all, as well. And so perhaps that's a way to get us started, Stephen, to see whether that resonates with others here as well.
Absolutely. And my artistic skills here, this is how I try to summarize this with the best of my artistic abilities. Democracy is the context in which many of us hopefully live. It's under threat. There's interactions between AI, CI, and EI. And the question is, we're quite confident, and the evidence that we brought together in the handbook is that CI can strengthen democracy and we can tap into emotional intelligence better. Now, what is the relationship between AI and democracy? Can CI be integrated, human collective intelligence with AI, and benefit from it? What is the relationship between the two? So in order to ask this question and start answering it today, we wanted to first have your impressions. And hopefully you're now seeing this survey. Do you think that we can tap into AI in order to make government smarter and more democratic? And same with the two other types of intelligence. And great to see what's the feeling, the sentiment within the group. There's quite a number of you. Stefan and David, you're allowed to vote. I'm not. It's always great to see the results before everyone. We'll ask her almost similar question at the end. So we'll see how maybe perceptions have evolved or not between now and 1 hour, within 1 hour.
We don't have all the same opinion.
Thankfully. Okay, well, it's starting to be quite clear, and I will share the results now, even though not everyone has voted, but I see that it's slowing down. So, do we think that we can tap into AI to make government smarter and more democratic? I guess the feeling here is quite positive, but with a large number of you who are unsure about this. Can we tap into collective intelligence better to make government smarter and more democratic? I'm delighted to see you've read the handbook. And some of you maybe have downloaded some chapters. Yes, I would share that feeling as well. And can we tap better into emotional intelligence? Almost the same results as with artificial intelligence. Generally positive, but unsure. And can we combine the three better? Well, I guess I'm feeling like you, hopeful. And it will be also the topic of tonight's conversation to discuss how can we do this. Cool. So going a bit further into the topic, you started sharing, Stefan, a bit more about the different notions of, oh, sorry, I didn't share the results. I should have pressed that button so you could see what I was commenting on. So there you have it. Stefan, how might we foster more positive dynamics between artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, and emotional intelligence? The €1 million question for tonight, or dollar.
Yeah, well, this is a $1 million euro question, but it's also a large question. But I think it goes back to perhaps the way I try to define intelligence, and then try to distinguish that artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, and emotional intelligence have different strengths and weaknesses as it relates to processing, as it relates to translating that into decisions, and as it relates to then subsequently also adaptive learning, or at least updating kind of the insights as things evolve as well. And I think that's where the sweet spot might be, is that what are some of the weaknesses, for instance, that collective intelligence have that artificial intelligence can bring to the table. And so one of the weaknesses from my point of view of collective intelligence is that it actually is very intensive in order to do this well. It's very hard to scale it up, to be quite honest, if we want to have kind of collective intelligence platforms that are meaningful and seen as legitimate. And it quite often has large barriers of entry as well. And so anyway, one way to think about this is that, for instance, artificial intelligence can actually deal with some of those challenges. It can actually, for instance, when we are thinking about how do we make sense of collective intelligence, and especially the input of collective intelligence, how can we accelerate that? How can we make it more agile in actually extracting the insights than what we currently have. I mean, I always in the past made a joke is that it's great to have public consultations, for instance, which is, of course, only one type of collective intelligence, for instance. The real problem with public consultations is that if you're successful, because how do you then make sense of actually all the input that you received in a meaningful way? And I think that's, for instance, one area where artificial intelligence can become a tool to improve sense making of actually all the input that has been received in a way that is more agile, is a way that is also seen as more equitable, because it can be more neutral, for instance, or be more trusted even than some of the processes that we've seen in which politics quite often takes over as it relates to making sense of public consultations as well. And that's just one way to get started. For instance, of sense making, we've seen a whole range of kind of innovations the last, I would say, just few months, where actually artificial intelligence is becoming more and more used for actually sense making of collective intelligence, and I think that's kind of one way to go about this. And we have not even started thinking about, for instance, the fact that today's call is in English, which means that a large majority of the population, including those in Belgium, cannot even participate in today's conversation as well. And so, to what extent can we actually start using artificial intelligence that has made great strides in actually real life translation in order to actually lower the entry of actually consultation, participation, and so on. So these are just kind of two examples, to low-hanging fruit examples, to get us started on where actually artificial intelligence can deal with some of the challenges that collective intelligence has in terms of making sense of actually the collective, and then two, lowering the barriers of entry, for instance, as well.
Absolutely. Actually, you see a button on Zoom now, AI companion. I've never tried it. I don't know how it can be my companion. I also see that we have Zelda Bass from Citizen Lab in the call today, in the conversation. And one of the chapters in our handbook was about a project you led with professors from the IT University of Copenhagen in Slagelse, where you used natural language processing to digest huge amounts of data coming out of a public consultation, if I recall correctly. So sometimes we will need that. And indeed, as you said, Stefan, this is developing more and more. And maybe, Zelda, you can share more about this at some point. We have a couple of other chapters. One is about self-moderation technology with AI to enable large-scale deliberation, including with people of different languages. And that chapter is written by Professor Jim Fishkin of Stanford University, where they've been developing these tools, and I understand others are doing that. And we also have an example of chatbot to enable better interaction between the parliament in Brazil and citizens. So I guess if you remember my so beautiful diagram with AI at the top and CI on the right, at least there's an arrow going from AI to CI potentially helping that. And I guess also we're seeing at the moment there's a citizen assembly, a citizen panel convened by the EU on artificial intelligence. And I've seen a few other processes, transformative scenario planning, et cetera, tackling artificial intelligence. So we can see the arrow perhaps going both ways in that quadrant, but that doesn't necessarily cover all the other areas. So we know, again, CI and emotional intelligence go very well together and need to reinforce and need to be taken care of to reinforce each other. So perhaps that leaves the other bit, artificial intelligence and emotional intelligence, but maybe we'll come back to this. David, what is your experience of leveraging in public consultations tools such as artificial intelligence, or your experience of what you've seen out there developing at the moment? Mic is off.
Thank you. It should be on now. Thank you, Stefan. I will start by rebounding on this triangle between artificial intelligence, collective intelligence, and emotional intelligence. And I think that at make.org, we are trying to find that sweet spot since the beginning. Make.org was created because we believe that technology and digital technologies can help extend the experience of participative democracy online. And so we use technologies in the beginning For us, AI is just one of the technology that we use that we leverage to improve engagement in the society. And I believe that we didn't call it emotional intelligence, and maybe I'm wrong in calling it that way, but we believe that there is a transformative part in the engagement of citizens that is also important in the process. Because when we say that democracy is under threat, it was under threat before AI, and AI is making it more stringent. But it's under threat because people lack trust into their elected officials, lack trust into the democratic process. And democracy is about bringing people back around the table and engaging them in order to bring trust back and to strengthen democracy again. And so we really believe that engaging as many people as possible just spread the trust. The more you engage with people, the better they become engaged. And the deliberative experience is the most engaging one. Not everyone can participate to a citizen panel, but it's very important. So now back to AI. Since the introduction of ChatGPT, I think that all in the field, we are oscillating between fear and amazement. So fear because we see that with deepfake, the ability to generate fake news, fake calls. I don't know if you have seen the result just in January in the primary in the US, but there has been a fake call from Joe Biden to try to avoid some Democrats to participate into the primary in New Hampshire. So 20 people received a false call from Joe Biden telling them that they should say they vote for November. It's no need to vote in the primary. It only serves the Republicans, which is obviously false. So the threat is not a theory. It's already here. It's already active. It has been also the case in Slovakia for those who follow what's happening in Europe. So the threat is there. And on the other hand, we see a lot of opportunities in AI. And for us at Made.org, we believe that AI gives a superpower to the user. If you have started using ChatGPT, you feel very powerful. So that suddenly you can write code if you couldn't write code before. You can generate beautiful images if you couldn't before. And we would like to give this superpower to the users, to the citizens. And there are three use cases that we see for AI that are positive, that can strengthen democracy. One, you already mentioned, Stefan, is using AI to moderate deliberation, and so taking deliberation at scale. So Stanford has been doing it before generative AI and is doing it better now. There has been also an example, that OpenAI grants for democratic inputs to AI. And one of the grantee actually developed a system like that where you can log into a video chat, and you were facilitated by an AI that summarized the discussion, and then you can vote on the summary to agree on it or to refine it. So there are a lot of people thinking of in that way. The two other use cases I see is one is an easier and better access to information. So for layman citizens, it's sometimes difficult to follow the debates of society. People do not have time to read everything. There is a lot of data and documentation online, but it's always hard to access. It's written in a technical language. And with AI, you can summarize it and make it accessible for citizens. And we are developing a solution using that capability. In France, we had a citizen panel on end of life. And with CESO in France, so the institution who organized it, we are going to launch in a few days or a few weeks a platform where you can just access all the debate through AI, and you can ask any question about the debates, and the AI will just give you a summary of what has been said about, I don't know, euthanasia, about what the religion are thinking about end of life, and what are the recommendations for the citizens, and you can access all that, and the AI will also provide direct link to the video. So the timeline, the exact timestamp in the video where the people can follow the debate about what has been said. So that's another use case. And the last use case that we see is to help people to contribute better, because you were saying, Stefan, that sometimes if you want to do collaborative intelligence well, you have a barrier to entry. One of the barriers to entry is the ability to contribute. People might feel a bit dumb or do not know maybe how to express themselves. And AI can be actually a useful assistance to help people to write better contribution, to just overcome their fear of speaking, and also to help them make better contribution that will be more impactful, because it can at least correct the spelling, but it can also help you ask you questions in order to refine your ideas and to even provide some facts to just strengthen your points. So these are three examples, maybe the three main you are thinking of right now, but I think that this is really what I call the attack part. So we need to defend against the threat against democracy with AI, and we need also to strengthen democracy because we can not only play in defense, we have to play in attack also.
Thank you, David. Very rich ones. I see a lot of questions in the chat, notably about human intelligence and emotional intelligence, which is a great transition, and we'll make sure as well to share the questions and open the debate a bit later. Just wanted to share something actually very interesting, because I see what's the link with emotional intelligence and human intelligence. Well, in the field of collective intelligence, we choose to say that emotional intelligence is an active part of the intelligence we define, notably through empathy and providing psychological safety in a group where citizens or wider audiences have to interact. One interesting thing I wanted to share is a PARI report from 2022. So PARI is an Institute of AI for the Common Good. They actually conducted several experiments where they show that, the AI system, AI machine, was actually more collaborative than humans in some certain situations, hence correcting what we would call human distrust bias in a collaborative game. So we all know the principle of the prisoner game and economic principles underlying. So it's actually interesting to see that in that case, the AI performed better collaboratively than humans. I know it's gonna link to a lot of questions, but so hence my next question. We think that AI can contribute to CI. What might be the links between EI and AI? And that's a question for Stefan.
Another easy question.
Yeah, it's another easy question as well. I do have to say is that, let me start with perhaps one of the challenges actually, or the danger, because I do anyway, and rightly, and thanks Stephen for sharing that paper about pro-social behavior where AI can actually stimulate that. And that, by the way, just to answer your question, is also something that we see as well, is that AI can be used for instance, social mirroring as well, right? So that you can actually use AI to document what others are thinking of, and then you get actually kind of a mirror of society, and then you can react and then actually try to understand, for instance, what others might feel, and also what others might think. And this is also something that we actually have used in citizens' assemblies. I mean, we held a citizens' assembly in 2000 at the height of COVID, in order to understand what their perspectives are on actually, for instance, the use of data for COVID. And here we used a platform which was kind of a commercial platform, but it actually was one of the first platforms that integrated AI in actually extracting immediately what people are thinking, and then sharing that back in order to get a reaction on, I mean, if this is what the group thinks, is that still your position, for instance? And so, and that was kind of an exercise in social mirroring, where you actually show what others are thinking in your group, and then seeing whether that makes you more empathetic, whether that changes your perspective, and whether that makes you more kind of pro-social as well. And especially at the time of kind of polarization, because that's the other threat that I feel is really a threat to democracy, is this kind of polarization. And then someone already put in the chat a kind of the filter bubble, which is exactly, anyway, fueling polarization. The question is whether you actually can use AI to confront people with alternative points of view, right? That they might not automatically disagree with, but at least are aware that their point of view is not the dominant one. This actually might even be the minority one, and that they might actually get more empathetic kind of perspectives by actually this kind of social mirroring that AI could provide as well. Now, one of the challenges, of course, is quite often not that well understood, is this kind of challenge of anthropomorphic engagement with the technology. And as I said, it's kind of not that well studied yet, although there are anyway no shortage of actually films that have shown the potential danger of actually becoming very close with your robot or with your device, and that actually might lead to less social behavior because of the anthropomorphic kind of reflection, or the anthropomorphic kind of engagement with tools. You might actually feel more related to the technical device than to other humans as well. And my worry is that we have not really understood this meaningfully on what the long-term impact might be. And also we have to be super careful in actually how we then, the words we use in the technology field, because I feel some of the words actually automatically generate anthropomorphic kind of relationships, despite the fact that it's just a technology, right? It's just a tool. And I think that's something from a challenge point of view that we gonna have to take into account. At the same time, of course, people do benefit from engaging with a chatbot, for instance. And that's also what we see. Impactful, actually, chatbots has been chatbots that support mental health support, right? Because you can actually use chatbots to provide support as long as, of course, as the kind of reactions are supported by trained therapists as well. It's not just kind of automatically generated as well. But so there are pros and cons. And I don't know whether that answered your question, Stephen, but I think the potential for social mirroring using AI, I think, has the potential to actually break the polarization cycle if we do this well, and even the filter bubble. But at the same time, we have to be aware of the challenges of anthropomorphic behavior in the technology space as well, where robots are becoming, if not more appreciated than humans, for instance, because they are easier to handle.
Thanks, Stefan. I see lots of comments and questions bubbling up. So we're going to very soon move on to the conversation and let all the input come from you, all of you who surely have lots of expertise. Welcome, Florent, who's doing his postdoc research on artificial intelligence and collective creativity, and others. I'm sure you have a lot to contribute. Just wanted to share a couple of things. So thanks for those remarks, Stefan. We're also seeing some positive developments in terms of sentiment analysis and making sense of a lot of data on that side as well, which can certainly be helpful to governments. We're also seeing efforts to use artificial intelligence to actually pacify and moderate conversations on social media. The mass of data there can also be better managed in order to avoid polarization, fake news, etc. So it's just a tool. It's a massive tool, and it's very powerful. Now, maybe transitioning to the conversation, the central proposition that strikes me and I'd like to put across to you, all of you, Stefan, David, and everyone in the conversation, is the following. If we believe, this is my hunch, that authoritarian regimes will have less restraints in using artificial intelligence in many ways to amplify their power internally or externally and to do damage. And we're certainly not naive here. And we can imagine lots of ways by which authoritarian regimes could and are already starting to use AI to exert more pressure, be more influential, control their population better, etc. And these are, again, just some preliminary examples. Well, democracy potentially can use also AI in different ways. And what I'm seeing is authoritarian regimes have a tendency to make mistakes because you have less dissent, you have less free circulation of information, you have fewer conditions for avoiding mistakes. On the other side, democracy, and that's the premise and the evidence that we've gathered, can tap into a diversity of perspectives which can help better regulate potentially artificial intelligence, can help make greater sense of what's coming out of intelligence. And so if AI is a tool that can amplify, it can both potentially amplify authoritarian regimes' tendency to make mistakes, and that can create great damage, as well as amplify democracy's ability to tap into collective intelligence and make better decisions that better correspond to people. So throwing that challenge out to all of you, I saw your comments. A key condition perhaps for this to happen is education of public servants, education of citizens. Surely that makes a lot of sense to me. So inviting comments from all of you, and maybe to break the ice, I don't know if Stefan and David, you have comments on this before we gather other thoughts.
I give that easy question to David, if he's open for it.
Yes, I can say a few things. It's we never thought really that way about authoritarian regime. So I think it's hard to fight authoritarian regime as we see with Russia and the level of propaganda you have here, and it's hard to fight it from the outside. But historically, what we were seeing was a trend for democracy to spread and authoritarian regime to regress. And right now, the main threat we saw on our side is that maybe that trend can be reversing. And there is a threat that some democratic regime fall back into authoritarian one. And the authoritarian regime are trying actively to destabilize democracy in order to help the establishment or the election of non-liberal leaders and to spread at least chaos and to try to help rise authoritarian leaders. So on our end, we were really focused on protecting democracy and making sure that authoritarian regime could not destabilize democracy. So we have the main tool we have, when I say defense, we are trying to promote what we call the democratic shield. So it's a list of 10 things that 10 actions that can be implemented right now to actually limit the influence of authoritarian regime on elections. We have action towards the institutions, so even the European Commission or the US Parliament. We have action towards the media and the influencers, where we try to promote a code of conduct in the way to use how to use AI and how to not use AI. Also towards the campaign and the parties, and we have some action toward the civil society, and we want to give tools to the civil society to fight against fake news, using fake news detectors, leveraging people that detect the fake news and that can spread the information very fast, and also providing something like a tool that we can use with our technology, where you have a reference of what the people already have said. So a reference where you have the truth of what has been said by each candidate, in order to for people to be able to check whether what they hear or what they say is a fake news or not. So really, this is the way we think about authoritarian. And one other leg maybe is we are also thinking about the bad use of AI, and as you mentioned, the bias of AI. AI have bias because they are based on large training sets that we do not master. We sometimes don't know what is inside, and there are bias in the training data. There can be bias in the reinforcement learning made on top of the initial training. And what we are trying to do, we have a huge project where we are trying to define the bias that can be an issue in a democratic setting. So if you want to use AI to facilitate a deliberation or to summarize a deliberation, we don't want the AI to introduce bias, for instance, to promote an idea that the AI feels it's better because it's more present in its training set, for instance. And we have a program with a CNRS in France, so AI researcher, with a political scientist that will define the kind of bias that can be an issue when you use AI in a democratic setting. So what are the principles that AI should adhere to, and then how we can detect the bias in the actual models, and how we can try to fix it. So this is the two legs that we are doing in order to avoid bad usage of AI. I'm not sure I have a solution for what's happening in Russia or other authoritarian regimes.
Okay, thank you very much. So much to tackle, right? And our promise is to finish. Some of you have direct experience of using AI in deliberative or democratic processes. Would you like maybe to share some of your impressions? This is, I believe the genie has just come out of the bottle and it's early days and things are going to keep evolving at a fast pace. So any comments on what you're witnessing, any of you? The bold ones get to speak first. Zelda.
Hello, everyone. I'll just hop in to share what I already wrote. So for those who have been able to keep an eye on the chat, sorry for the repetition, but I think it is an important point because, so at Citizen Lab where I work, Citizen Lab is a citizen engagement platform. I work specifically with local governments in France in accompanying them in using this platform and conceiving their digital participation projects. We recently just had, a few days ago, our own webinar around AI and participation more specifically. So I guess the more CI branch of this talk today. And something that was interesting because we did a similar poll was asking participants, and a lot of them are people in local governments that are running these participation practices online and processes online. What is the main added value for you in terms of AI and the place AI is starting to take up, and more specifically ChatGPT and so on? And a lot of the responses were about gaining time, which I think is a key point here that I underlined in comments, in terms of we don't want participation practitioners and local governments that are running participation to be afraid of participation or more ambitious participation because analyzing contributions becomes too much of a hassle. So I see a great added value there. However, as I wrote, I think it was really interesting in the discussion to also keep in mind that that shouldn't be the ultimate goal. So that gain in time needs to be redirected then in terms of, I personally think, just better feedback loops. So if there's more time to actually, if you're gaining more time, then that means it's more time towards impact. So what we call in French, le droit de suite. So getting back to citizens, closing the feedback loop, and just making sure there actually is a follow-up in terms of contributions and citizen contributions. So that's from a very AI CI or participation point of view. One of the comments which I thought was interesting was in terms of what are the risks if AI starts to be seen as a tool to think for citizens. So I think it is really interesting as AI may be lowering the barrier or to participate, but then again, and I had never really thought about the emotional intelligence of things, so I'm really happy to be in this discussion today, is could AI be a sort of emotional barrier then to connecting to the content? So as a citizen contributing an idea and for it there to be engagement, even the physical aspect of contributing through a tool that's helping you formulate things differently or better, is that removing a sense of engagement or not? So someone brought that up in a discussion, and I think it's really interesting. All I have to add on my end.
Yeah, if I may build upon that, Stephen, because I think it was Olivier who put that in the chat there on what's the potential impact on engagement if you have tools that tools that take out actually a lot of some of the work that we wanna make easier, but at the same time that might actually disincentivize people. And I just back from a week with some peer-to-peer knowledge comments, such as Wikipedia, Ushahidi, you name it. And the key challenge that they are seeing is actually indeed a decline in actually contributions to, for instance, those peer-to-peer knowledge comments. And anyway, one of the questions and one of the assumptions is that that is actually the result of starting to introduce artificial intelligence, and that actually anyway, people are less inclined to actually contribute because they feel like they won't get recognized as this is kind of a human contribution. But more importantly, they also are less inclined to contribute because they feel everything they contribute will eventually be sucked up by large language models, and they don't want to create something that is fodder for large language models and not just for human consumption. And so we do need to see and think about kind of the both angles and challenges. Is that how do we keep the incentives structure for participation while at the same time lowering some of the barriers, to participate, but also to make sense of it as well.
Thank you very much. Paul Hershaw. And I forgot to invite anyone who joins in to maybe introduce themselves also. That'd be great. Paul, go ahead.
I'll take that advice then. Hi, my name's Paul. My career is mainly in electoral politics, like political campaigning. And I actually had a technical question on the LinkedIn post. You flagged this AI consultation analyzer, which I thought was really, really interesting because a lot of, well, I think everybody knows like those consultations can suck up a lot of resources and time. And I think they're unsatisfying for the people that participate frequently. And so I had more of a technical question on how specifically natural language processing is being used to take sometimes thousands or hundreds of thousands of text submissions or words within text submissions and then creating something that can be meaningful to decision makers to ensure that people's input is being taken into account. And then specifically how large language models have changed that process? Because I saw your paper was in 2020, so the landscape has changed dramatically on the technical side. And for some context, the two areas I'm interested in is I think LLMs offer an opportunity to change public opinion polling to get more unstructured input, sort of more like doing large focus groups as opposed to push button polling. But then on a more sort of utopian side, you could imagine governments getting frequent input, constant input of unstructured tests about people's experiences at the hospital or with the aviation sector, sort of public utility type pieces of society. And I think LLMs offer an interesting opportunity to take that unstructured text and turn it into much more meaningful input for decision makers.
So just to respond to Stephen, again, I don't want to, just to respond to Paul, based upon the post that I put on LinkedIn, which was the result of the launch of a, it's called Analytics, which basically is a tool provided by the UK government to generate insight from public consultations. And they are planning on releasing the code, so we will know better what the real kind of deal is once that is publicly available on GitHub. But as I understood it, is that it's really an advanced use of topic modeling, where you actually extract different topics from a large language, from large data sets, and as a result, you then cluster it according to topics, and that is a way to then actually see, well, these are kind of the clusters of topics that comes into play. The other thing that quite often is forgotten about the advantage of actually using AI for making sense of public consultations is that a lot of public consultations have a lot of astroturfing as well, right? And meaning sometimes you can say, look, there are many examples in the US where they said we had 100,000 people contributing, of which actually like kind of 80% was astroturf, right? Was actually already kind of disinformation of public consultations. And I think the great thing about AI is that you can actually start identifying also the kind of disinformation in public consultations, and how we then make public consultations more equitable, but also more trustworthy, because we have to be honest, a lot of the public consultations are actually captured. And how do we make sure that that we actually do better as well? Now, the whole question on real life monitoring, I think is a good one, and that goes back to, I think at the beginning there was a distinction between when we talk about democratic governance, on the one hand, we have the democratic aspect of making it more democratic, but also can we make governance more smarter, right? And which anyway is then about not just about the level of participation, but the level of quality of decision making as well. And of course, one of the promises is that it can make it smarter. But the challenge with, for instance, real life monitoring of people's behavior and needs is that it actually might lead to preemptive behavior that ignores larger trends, right? And so I think you need both, right? So it's important to have this kind of real life feed, but if you don't take the trend into account over a period of time, you might actually miss something, right? And that's what I fear, is that quite often, because now the real life feed is here and you constantly respond, but you ignore the larger trend that actually might lead to the behavior as well. And I think we need kind of both elements. But what is, from my point of view, really exciting, which goes back to my third definition of kind of intelligence, is that we actually are capable now to not just be evidence-based, based upon RCTs, which takes 5 years to make sense what the evidence is, right? But we can actually have now a much more rapid living evidence kind of model on what policies actually work, what don't work, what are the variables that explain why they work as well, so that we don't have to rely on RCTs as kind of the only mechanism to create evidence that informs policymaking. And this concept of living evidence is gaining more and more traction, and AI supports that kind of approach as well. There's no shortage of platforms that are being experimented now to actually extract and document evidence in a more faster way than we've had in the past.
Felix Kufus, thanks for raising your hand, and don't hesitate to introduce yourself also.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephen. It was a very interesting conversation. Thank you for that. My name is Felix Kufus. I'm working for the UN Peacekeeping Department in a team that looks at how digital tools can be used for community engagement. How can we actually scale qualitative insights? So what we see is basically we have small group focus groups and can very much look under the hood and really find out about the interest and needs, and not only the initial positions of people, but as larger as we go with a group of people that we involve in our dialogues, the more we come into a situation where we basically just scrap positions and do not really have the ability to have meaningful conversations and meaningfully find out what the needs and the interests of the people are. And what I see when I see like these discussions about the use of AI to foster community engagement, I see these two approaches. On the one hand, to have like focus groups and then sort of find out about certain needs and interests, and then extrapolating them towards larger parts of the population on the one hand, using these collective response systems like Remesh and others to really have large-scale conversations, but not being able to go deeper. Now, my question would be, especially looking at the large-scale conversations, enabling a lot of people to raise their voices, what kind of interesting approaches or methods have you seen to actually deepen the quality of insights when having larger groups of people you want to consult? Thank you very much.
Well, personally, the examples that I've witnessed are of the kind that I mentioned earlier, whereby the large-scale deliberations are enhanced by artificial intelligence. So, for instance, the deliberative polling with thousands of people breaking into small groups digitally. And the evidence so far is that the conversations were more civil because the tool is designed to spot when people speak too long. I mean, it plays the role of the facilitator. And does it help deepen the conversation? I wouldn't be able to say, but we've also seen cases where groups in a deliberation need to have equal information. And that can also be a tool to be able to go get information if you can if you can ensure that there aren't the biases that we're all afraid of. So these are some of the benefits. And I certainly want to take the precaution here to say that I think none of us are glossing over the dangers, right, of the distortions and the difficulties that AI is bringing. But these are also some of the benefits. And maybe turning towards with an eye on the clock, we have 10 minutes, and maybe we could, it's certainly not enough for such a conversation, but, we wanted to tap into our collective intelligence to start a conversation. But maybe now turning towards the solutions. When I was preparing for today's conversation, I was thinking that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, if we want to give a chance to democracy to use AI and tap into CI and AI better, and therefore come out stronger than perhaps authoritarian regimes and to come out stronger in the face of the attacks we're seeing at the moment. Well, certainly, I think my premise would be that we have to realize that the genie is out of the bottle. We're going to have to live with it. And the best thing we can do is to see where the potential is for this alignment, even if this is an abstract idea, even if there are lots of threats. And then in order for this to happen, obviously, we're going to need to invest, and this is somewhat happening. But as some of the remarks show, it shouldn't just be left to the private sector. There needs to be some serious investment in infrastructure, and also, and this was raised by Zelda in the comments, in training and mastering these tools. And there's no time to waste here. And of course, generative AI feeds off the data we give it, right? So it, trash in, trash out, the more we can feed it with interesting and relevant data, better. And doing this in a democratic way, also having a regular conversation, because this is going to keep unfolding and changing with new ethical questions, new dilemmas emerging, I am sure, on a very regular basis. So ensuring the democratic governance of the whole thing, if I may say, in a context whereby, well, we can't govern the way we used to. Our mom and pop's old representative democracy is needing to reinvent itself in many ways. And for that, we need to have more generally a philosophy, I think, that is oriented towards seeking those benefits. Again, not glossing over the dangers. I'm throwing this out there. It's probably very incomplete, and I'm sure it is. So we'd love to hear, what can we do now to give this a chance? Who might have some thoughts about this? Stefan, David, colleagues?
Yeah, happy to go. I mean, I think one of the challenges that quite often, there's a lot of discussion about, of course, what level of ethics do we need in order to prevent misuse, right? And I think that it's still obviously a very important area that we need to tackle. But we also have to prevent misuses, and I see a lot of potential misuses of actually AI in the collective intelligence space, in the space to advance democracy, mainly because there is a power asymmetry between those that have access to the tools and, more importantly, have access to the data, and those that don't. And I think we do need to deal with some of those power asymmetries, which I have written as kind of another ethical challenge of today's society. It's not just about the potential misuse, it's about the fact that many are going to be left behind. And it's not just about global south-north divide, it's also even within countries, those that have more access to technology resources are going to have years ahead on how to apply this, as opposed to those that are going to be left behind for traditional, quite often social exclusion reasons, right? And I think that's something that we need to put front and center, because my fear is that these are very powerful tools that actually might deepen kind of the power asymmetries, might deepen social exclusion, than actually bridge them, right? And I think that only will actually contribute to a less democratic, less equitable kind of environment. So access to data, access to technology, I think we need to oversee for sure. And then as it relates to data, it's not just about access to data, it's also about making sure that the data is then qualitative and actually AI ready. Most of the open data, we have a whole initiative around why is open data not part of the data set at the moment in a lot of the large language models, and it's because they are not ready for even leveraging it for AI. And so we need to also invest in making actually open data, public data, AI ready. And that in itself is going to be an investment, right?
Thanks for these are very important additions to my limited list. Bianca Baumler, delighted to have you. You raised your hand. You can also introduce yourself. With the mic not happening, not working. Oh, shoot. Well, maybe you can type it in the chat and we'll share it while you're trying to solve this. David, you raised your hand as well. Do you want to?
Yes, so your list is very great. I think one important thing is it's a new technology. It has a lot of potential. It's evolving very, very fast. For those following the technology, it changes every month. I think we should experiment a lot because one thing we are trying to tackle at make.org is the to scale the engagement. Scaling the engagement means being able to involve people that do not have many time, do not using the technology very well. So we have to pay a lot of attention of how to bring everyone on board. And this requires a lot of experiment, a lot of sharing in the community of a good practice. And speaking about sharing and open data, we are also, as I said, working on a program to reduce the bias in the large language model to avoid the misuse in the democratic setting. And this program will produce comments. So we will release the data that we use to evaluate the bias. We want to develop a tool to evaluate the bias of it, and will provide the data we use to fix the LLM. So I agree with Stefan that it's also important that we produce as many open resources as possible in order to tackle collectively that huge problem of AI. And we can also use, of course, collective intelligence to also steer AI, because when steering of AI, of what are the good policy to develop a new AI, what are the check we must implement before having a new AI app or using an AI app in a collective settings. And I really believe that this should be also be put in front of the public and solved with the citizens. So this is what we are trying to build right now, and really happy to have this conversation here with you, because I think it's going in the right direction.
Cool. Bianca, you just tried to rejoin. Come in. Hey, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Yes, exactly. It's working now. I had to change the settings. But I just wanted to make a very quick comment on what was said about access to data, not specifically linked to the global south and resources that if you compare Europe to the global south, but if you compare Europe to the United States. I think there's a lot of data that is available in Europe that in the past has actually been used, as far as I understand, by Google for languages using EU translation data. So I think my point is that there are probably resources in Europe that are underutilized, would be my guess. And I didn't introduce myself. I'm not at all an AI expert, but I work in public diplomacy and have very, very briefly touched upon AI diplomacy, but on a very superficial level. So the question of maybe are there resources for sure in Europe that are just simply being underutilized that perhaps American companies are using even today? I know it's been in the past that I think it was Google Translate was using all the EU 20, back then probably not 23 languages, but all the language information that is out there was being used by an American company. So
yeah, well, because back to the other element, Stephen, that quite often is ignored is that in order to, especially for if you want to train large language models, you not only need data, you also need computational power, right? And that turns out to be not equally distributed, let's put it that way. And so that's another element from my point of view, is that actually those that have computational power are going to be the ones that are going to be ahead of the curve. And so anyway, focusing that is more equally distributed, including kind of public access to computational power, or at least anyway, some kind of broader access to computational power is going to be important to have as well.
Indeed, and thank you, Francesco, for sharing what looks like an interesting report from the think tank CEPS on this. And there's so much we haven't covered. This makes me realize that there are applications of AI that can benefit the common good more generally, applications to become more efficient with the use of energy or any other resource, etc. And lots of other aspects. It was lovely to have you. Thank you very much, all of you, and à bientôt.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
thank you. Goodbye.